Welcome to the Inspiration North podcast, inspiring stories from inspirational people and how they found their passion, their true north. I'm James Eves.
And I'm Michelle Minikin, and this is the Inspiration North podcast.
Today's episode, From the Wrong Side of the Tracks to Downing Street, with Nicole Johnston. We talk about wanting to be Australia's Prime Minister when she was 5 years old, her first meeting with Gordon Brown and White House officials, and her advice for Donald Trump.
Nicole had a misspent youth in politics and government, advising senior ministers in the UK and Australia, including Gordon Brown and Boris. She loved working in government. She felt she could change the world. Nicole is now an author, ghostwriter and book coach. She loves helping people finish their books, whether business or fiction. She is a passionate believer in the healing capacity of writing. Seth Godin is right. The book that will change our lives is the one we write ourselves. Her latest book, co-authored with the amazing Anna McAfee, launched on 10th of September, and her crime novel is with her editor.
So, good morning to you, Nicole. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you guys?
We're just peachy, thank you.
Interesting.
Yeah, should we get on to the first question
Yes,
then?
please.
So, when you were little then, did you know what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Yes, I did.
Ooh.
I am told by my mother that from the age of 5, I said I was going to be the Prime Minister.
Cool.
She had one kid who wanted to be a bricklayer, one who wanted to be a farmer, and somewhere came this one that wanted to be the Prime Minister.
Fine.
I was a bolshy Madam right from the off.
And so from your accent, you're obviously from further afield.
I am, yeah. I hail from the most isolated capital city in the world. So we thought what was a really good idea is that we'd go from the quietest city in the world to one of the biggest cities in the world. I don't know what, I've never got rid of my accent, but we're 20 years next year since we moved here. We came for 2 years.
Oh, wow.
And fell in love with London.
Talk to us about your journey to becoming the Prime Minister.
Well, yes, that didn't quite work.
No.
Basically, if I had to go back, I would say I was born into a fairly difficult situation. My mother ended up a single parent. My father was a fairly violent drunk who gambled and was just not really the nicest soul. And so my mum ended up with 3 kids, and she didn't have any kind of qualifications or anything to fall back on. So her day was made up of cleaning in the morning. She was a preschool assistant during the day, and she waitressed in a Chinese restaurant at night. And it's only just recently become clear to me that actually we used to sit in old Charlie, he was the guy that owns the Chinese restaurant, in his office and do our homework. And then at the end, the chef would make us this huge meal and we'd eat with the family. So we just thought it was like Christmas every night. And it's only just occurred to us, actually, because I spoke to one of my very posh friends. We used to live in central London, and Sir James, ex of the FCO, said to me one day, we were all going out, all of the neighbours, we often catch up and go out, and he said, shall we go Chinese? And Chris said, oh no, Nicole's really particular about her Chinese. And he said, oh, why is that? And I just knew that he thought I'd lived there, or, Anyway, so I said, oh, because my mum was a waitress in a Chinese restaurant, so we ate with the chef. And he went, oh. See the utter confusion on his face.
Waitresses, they have children.
Exactly. That wasn't quite the story I expected. So basically, I'm looking at this situation and just going, right, one, I can't be reliant on a man. And I think men shouldn't be reliant on women either. I think we do need to be independent. And 2, I need to put myself in a position where my mother wouldn't have had to work so hard in 3 jobs if she, perhaps got some more qualifications. And of course, she grew up in, she was born in the 40s, grew up in the 50s, 60s. She said you could walk out of a job and into another one the next day. That was just how it was. And so I think that's what I saw, a massive level of unfairness. So in Australia, bizarrely, there was no single parent or sole parent pension at all. So she literally, whatever we needed. And my father didn't pay maintenance. And the option was basically for the court to send him to jail, which she didn't think would add to our experience as children. So she said she didn't need it. We did eventually, I have to say, one of our housing things, and God love my auntie, she did help, but we spent some time having nowhere else to live, in shearers' quarters on her farm. Now, I have to tell you, a tin shed, effectively it was, so it leaked in winter. We all slept in the same room. And in summer in 45 degrees heat, tin is just not special. No. So it was an interesting experience. I remember us, and then we got a state housing house, which is like council housing, and we had nothing. So we had this house. I think pretty much everyone we grew up with ended up in jail, pretty much, except for the Vietnamese refugees next door, who were gorgeous people. And I think that refugee things really stuck with me, what they went through. You know, I was conscious that they had sold up everything. They're coming over on a really rickety boat. You know, I know this gets very deep, but Thai pirates attacked them, stole everything, raped their mother and threw her overboard, and raped their 6-year-old sister. So it was horrific. And that's really, I think all of that, living in this house where we had, you know, a rolled up bit of carpet and an old TV someone had given us, and we're eating off a cardboard box. I think all of that was basically what really motivated me to think this has to be different. And I kind of wish that the world didn't all have to grow up next to Vietnamese refugees to have that kind of empathy for them, because, you know, they go through wars. You know, we're going through coronavirus. We're being asked to stay at home and wear masks and wash our hands. What these people go through is just beyond anything we can comprehend. So that was the start of it. And there was a really amazing moment where I lived in a town where there was a Catholic girls' school. I wasn't Catholic, but they used to do an exam, and if you got a high enough amount, you would get in. So I did. I was the last year of people that went through this exam, and that was the moment that I stopped being the poor kid, but not least of which we all had uniforms. But that was the moment where sisters, the presentation sisters, they were called, you were going to uni, because otherwise you were letting the school down. So university had never been in my mindset. Nobody in my family had ever gone to university. It just was not in our, and all of a sudden I spent 5 years with these people going, yeah, you will, because otherwise you're going to let us down. And so that was a major thing. So cut forward, I guess, I remember being political from when I remember being 13 when Malcolm Fraser was voted out, and I personally blamed him for the situation my mother was in. And I remember him crying when he got voted out, and he's this really brutal 13-year-old going, God, you know. And then we went into this blissful period in Australia in the 80s and 90s where we had Bob Hawke and we had Paul Keating, and I don't know, we really felt like things were changing. And I think I went into that period. So I was very active politically early on. And I remember being about 16, handing out how to vote cards, and some old lady saying to me, you only vote Labor because your parents do. I said, don't be ridiculous. They vote Labor because I do. And so I think I said to you, I just kept turning up eventually at the minister's office. Kim Beazley it was. Lovely, lovely man. He's now the governor of Western Australia. And he became Deputy Prime Minister, but I just kept turning up to his office until he eventually gave me a job. I mean, I'm here. And then I had a really bad car. So I had been going to university. I started off in business, and I think that was me thinking I need to make money. And I was rubbish. I think I lasted about 6 months in, and I thought, you know, it wasn't even that I wasn't doing well. I just was bored. I mean, it just wasn't me at all. So I got offered a job, and then in that period, I was driving a car with a faulty retread, and not realising that in very hot temperatures it's bad. The car rolled, and I nearly lost my arm, and ended up in hospital for 7.5 weeks. And it got MRSA, what you guys call MRSA, and we used to call golden staph. And I think that the area I was working in that I loved, they closed the division down. So all of a sudden I'm starting to feel I'm disadvantaged again. because I'm disabled. Actually, apart from losing that period of time and my body really struggling with it, I don't think I was, but in my head, I was coming from backwards again. So anyway, fast forward a lot. I went and worked in politics, which I loved. And honest to God, when I look back now, we were so lucky because the people we were working with were just large. I mean, they weren't all perfect. In fact, none of them were. They were so committed to changing the world, you know. And I think that's what we forget about politicians. They start off like that. And then I started to see the rot set in, you know, when I worked with this amazing woman, Carmen Lawrence, and she was so much cleverer than I would ever be. And she was taken out by her own party, who were very, very challenged by an exceptionally clever woman. And I watched that and thought, if that's happened to her, what would then happen to me? And I remember then I started to kind of feel like, I thought if she can't do it, and I mean, she did actually, she survived all of that. And of course, then they had nothing to throw at her. But I thought, and also there's a loss of privacy you don't understand as a young person. Once you've lost it, you don't get it back. And I think, you know, we see a lot of this with these reality shows that people get their fame, they even get money, and then all of a sudden their life is just owned by other people, you know, and you caught that level of publicity. You can't very well turn around and say, well, you can't say mean things about me on Twitter, you know, because you're inviting it. And I think that was really important. But in the midst of all this, and actually I had a brief career moment of joy where I'm sitting in a community legal centre and I see this piece of paper that says the government's going to remove the rights of people to have representation, to have translators, and to appear before a tribunal if a government makes a decision about them. And I thought, I don't think so. So we fought that for 5 years. The former Attorney General of Australia actually physically hates me. And it was a love project. And it was one of those things too, if you don't have a decision by Social Security against you, or tax, or by, you know, if you're not a refugee or an asylum seeker, you don't ever know what a tribunal is or care about them. So it's one of those really unsexy things. And unfortunately in politics, they're the things that often get traded off because nobody knows you did a deal on it. And God love the Labor Party and the Democrats in Australia. They came to the party and they absolutely blocked it. We blocked it in the Senate. And I remember the Attorney General's office ringing the next day, and I, again, was a brutal sod. And they rang and said, can we talk? And I went, no, we won. It's done. And nobody will ever know we did that. But at the time, I was then offered a Senate seat, but Chris and I were planning to come here. And a Senate seat is, I mean, you're there for 6 years. That's a minimum commitment. Of course, I, as you can imagine, would have taken it really seriously. But I just always had this love of, I don't know, I had literally been through London in 1993, come down from Glasgow, having seen family, and got to Heathrow, sorry, it might have even been Gatwick, to fly out to Switzerland. And so, you know, I'm not sure that gave me the best view of it, but I had to be here. So we, as I said, we turned up for 2 years and stayed for nearly 20.
That's brilliant. So we've not kicked you out yet then?
You haven't kicked us out, no. Although, oh gosh, it's an awful thing to say, but I have fallen a bit out of love with the UK since 2016. I've never ever felt I belonged in Australia. I don't feel Australian. I know that's a really odd thing to say because I sound so Australian. But I think when I turned up to London, I felt like I belonged here. These were my people. And I think discovering I was part of Europe was just, I mean, I just don't think people in the UK realise how lucky they are. The whole world's at their feet. That is a passport, has been a passport that's the most powerful in the world. And we just fell in love with the whole deal that we could be part of this great thing. And I totally buy into the EU. I think it's a really complicated marriage. You know, we all know in our own relationships, 2 people's hard. 27 countries is really hard. But you know, something like that is, you know, we are economically, in trade terms, and even militarily, the EU is a force that can't be beaten by China or America. And not that we will ever want to be in that position, but if we ever were. So yeah, that broke my heart a bit. But for a long time, I would say we were here a good 10 or 12 years, and we'd go past, the Palace of Westminster or down Whitehall and just go, oh my God, we're in London. And I remember when we first got here, standing outside Downing Street and thinking, is this kid from the wrong side of the tracks in the back blocks of some dodgy little Australian town ever going to get inside those gates? And I do remember, because of course I was part of the Labor Party, and when we first got here, Blair was in, and of course I did go in there, and I remember jumping in this cab and saying, take me to Downing Street. And I said to him, I've always wanted to say that. And he went, and I went in, but actually what happened is 2 years later, I'm working for the Chancellor of the Exchequer, which is Gordon Brown, which was the most amazing job with the most brilliant minds I have ever worked with, or I expect ever to work with. And I'm deciding who gets to go into Downing Street, the kids from the wrong side of the tracks.
So what did that feel like?
Oh, God, it was amazing. I think all of us in our own little way want to change the world. And I think there were so many times in my life, and I think that I am feeling that loss now, because at the moment, albeit I have been feeling better since Saturday, but I think I've started to kind of, I'm such an optimist, and being in a place, I think politics was my vehicle where I felt like there were moments where, I mean, I can't pretend I'm not Labor. I've always been left-leaning. That's not to say I've always approved of, I mean, I am not a fan of Blair at all. And actually, ironically, in Australia, my old boss, Kim Beazley, and another of the people I knew really well, Jeff Gallop, were best friends. I mean, Jeff Gallop was best man at Tony Blair's wedding. And so he told Tony Blair I was coming. And then my husband's father got married and we delayed our trip. So by the time we got here, I then wrote to him and said, Jeff, let you know I'm coming. And he said, I'm so sorry, Nicole, you're just too late. We've filled our positions. And at the time, I was devastated. When I went to work for Brown and had such a fantastic relationship with him, I realised that probably wouldn't have been possible. And also, Blair, for me, makes policy on the hill. We have had people told with their interviews that basically he'll come and say, I want a policy on blah in half an hour. I'm sorry, that's not how policy's done. I know people who've knocked back jobs with him because they refused to do it. So I said to them when I went to this interview, hey, accounting, economics, studied both, crap at both. And they said, oh, we've got enough accountants and economics per square metre here. We don't need them. And what I did have is I spoke his language. So when what would happen in the Treasury is Brown wanted to do social policy. And of course, he doesn't have a social policy department. He has an economic policy department. So someone would say he wants this. They would do the most, I mean, they were brilliant, the people at Treasury. This administratively, economically efficient solution. And he would say, that's not what I want. And I'd say, I know what he wants. So I'd say, this is how it's going to help low income and socially disadvantaged people. This is what we need to do. And in every briefing, I would do a box saying, we don't have the money for that. And he would go, oh, I love it. And people would say, we don't have the money for that. I told him that, but you feel free to go back and tell him we can't have it. And it was just brilliant. So we had this tiny little social policy unit. I think 3 of us were part-time or compressed hours and 2 full-timers. And I think we ended up in the first budget I was there, like 7 things in the budget, which was just, and also what I loved is he always worked harder than everyone. So he was up at 5:30, he was on that treadmill. I turn up, right, up my first thing, and they say, you need to do an event in Downing Street with the White House in 3 weeks. I went, yeah, of course I do. I thought this is some initiation process, yeah? Yeah, of course I do. No, you really do. Okay, I really do. So fortunately, the FCO had funded it. So my first meeting with Brown, and I've been there 10 seconds, is with White House officials in this meeting. And I said to the advisor, Stuart Wood, who's now in the Lords, who is fantastic, I said to him, dude, if you ask me a question, my answer is going to be, bleh. You have to answer the questions. We don't have to worry about that. because he's one of those ministers that it didn't matter what they asked him, he just knew it. So he lets them speak. What he's wanting to talk about volunteering, because he believes volunteering and mentoring really opens those networks that kind of public school boys have. Do you know what I mean? They open the worlds to people that don't have opportunities. And we know that from LinkedIn Local, that networks open opportunities because people want to work also with people they like and that are like-minded. So anyway, he says to this guy who I often see on television, he says to him, so he says, you know, we've had a lot of volunteers. And Gordon Brown says, really? So why is that? Why have all these people come forward? And he said, you know, September the 11th actually does a sign like a gun and says, defending the homeland. And you could almost see Gordon go, not quite where we were going with that.
Talking about militias or?
Not quite. Oh, gosh, I wonder if I should even be telling you this. But anyway, what happens is all of a sudden he turns this whole conversation around to development, international development, and how we have to empower countries and make sure they've got broadband and funding and institutions. And if we don't do that, we can't just hand them some money and expect them to go off and make things happen. And we come out of the end of this conversation and we're standing in the hall. These guys brief George Bush on Tuesdays and Thursday mornings every week. They said to me, he is awesome. We have never met anyone like him before. So part of me is like, yeah, he is awesome. And the other part of me is like, you're the superpower. How haven't you met anyone like him before? And basically then we did this huge event, and it was funny because he had another minister who shall remain nameless. We got young people, and we knew young people in Downing Street, they're not going to want to talk. It's not a place they're going to feel comfortable. So we got this fantastic charity in called Kick-Ass, and Kick-Ass totally briefed them, got them in. And of course they were off. It was hilarious. And oh gosh, there was this really funny moment where the young people didn't understand why this was funny, but Brown was meant to be Prime Minister the year before, that they'd done a deal with Blair that he was going to be Prime Minister, and then it didn't happen. So we're all sitting in this room, and this young bloke comes, who is gorgeous and has gone on to be a super duper star at Google, yeah? He says, if anyone had told me last year that I'd be a number 11 Downing Street, I wouldn't have believed them. Well, the place roars, don't they? Mus has no idea what he said's funny. But of course, we're all sitting there going, yeah, you told Gordon Brown he was going to be a number 11 instead of number 10 last year. But he wouldn't leave. So his advisors are going, oh my God, you know, you're meeting. They're downstairs. And he's going, yeah, I'm not going. I'm not going. So we just had this amazing event. It was amazing. And actually, I don't know this. I can't get into his head. But I did actually think he quite liked saying in his briefings that we were working with Kick-Ass. He was funny. He was very funny. He wasn't great in a debate. But when you got him on a subject, you had his absolute attention. I remember doing a breakfast with media companies, like all the top media companies, and we brought them in for this breakfast, and Jon Snow was there, and Jon Snow and Gordon Brown used to bounce off each other. Like, they are both, I mean, he is really amazing, Jon Snow. I really admire him. And they just bounced off each other. And as these media companies were coming out, John was in Downing Street, his son, and he was only a toddler then. And we turned our back and off he went into the room. And fortunately, they were clearing up. And I was standing behind John trying to catch him before he walked in on this meeting. And I just see the Chancellor coming out and him seeing his son. And it was like the sun came out, just the joy on his face. And he picked him up and he took his son around and introduced him to every single one of these people. And as people were walking out, they just went, he is nothing like we thought he was. You know, I mean, again, he fell foul of Rupert Murdoch, you know, because he wasn't going to do we could have told him that. We could have told Rupert Murdoch that, you know, Gordon Brown does not do what people tell him to do. He does what he thinks is right. So, yeah, no, that was amazing. It doesn't feel like that anymore. You know, I think I mentioned to you that I've worked with Boris, and I didn't think this was going to be a good experience for us. And I think it was virtually the opposite experience working for Boris than it was for Gordon. And I do think if we had someone like Gordon Brown in at the moment, we would be in a very different place.
Yeah, I was always astounded. People in London seem to really like him as a mayor, though.
I never understood that, because everybody who knew him, like a lot of stuff that's happening now, they're saying we don't understand, and we were like, but it was there. I did this event, seriously, and I was good at briefings by then. It was something, you don't do them for 20 years and be rubbish at them, or there is something seriously wrong. And I remember one of the people in his office ringing and saying, this is a brilliant briefing. And seriously, I'm not joking. It was 2 pages, maybe a page and a half. All it said on is, I need you to say thank you. So we had a dearth of foster carers. And we had an enormous number of kids needing foster places, and we decided to use his media presence so that we could say thank you to all these amazing people. I mean, seriously. So we asked all the councils to nominate, which was really hard for them, nominate a couple of people to turn up and be acknowledged at this event. And there was one lady who literally looks after dying babies. So I don't even know how somebody does that. And then we had all these care leavers who'd helped us do the event, who were mayoral advisors. Just amazing. I mean, one of the kids had grown up in Sierra Leone, seen both of his parents killed, had been shot, had lived in a refugee camp, and then gone into care. And he was amazing. That's James, a little shout out James there. And he was amazing. And we go to this event, and his entire job is to say thank you. That is all I've asked him to do. And he stands up at this event. Now, one of my colleagues, who is one of the most brilliant people I've ever worked with, briefs him on the way up. Now, you probably shouldn't need briefing to just say thank you. Here's the thing. He's not a bad person. He's just lazy. So he gets up there. It's 10:30 in the morning, and he says, have you been given a drink? A cup of tea. We've given him a cup of tea because it's 10:30 and there's kids here.
Yeah, just pour the champagne already,
yeah. And then he stands up and does this speech on the Boris bikes, and how 12 or 13 of them had been nicked, but they'd got 11 back or something. And one of those kids turns to me and says, is he saying that it's kids in care that are nicking the bikes? And I wanted to hurt him, because I thought all we needed to do was make this group feel good. And to be fair, we got amazing media coverage, and nobody covered his speech, because I didn't understand why he would be talking about Boris bikes. But I felt really aggrieved for those kids. That kid went to uni. They've got 6 times less chance of going to university than any other kid in this country. And he went and graduated from university, and yet he's sitting here thinking the mayor thinks I probably nicked the bikes. And it's the thoughtlessness of it. It clearly has the brains to do it, but it's just the complete thoughtlessness. And he does just make stuff up as he goes along. I am probably very hard on him, but that day I just thought he was always very pleasant to me. He's not always pleasant, but he was always pleasant to me. And that day I just thought, I can't forgive you for the way you made those kids feel.
Yeah, it's that Maya Angelou saying, you never forget how somebody makes you feel.
No.
I'm massively paraphrasing.
And I'm not one of those kids, but I wonder, would I have thought in that same circumstance? I mean, it's exactly like we're talking about. Earlier we're talking about how if you've dealt with some level of discrimination or some level of lowered expectations because of a chance of birth or whatever, you understand it when somebody else feels it. And yet everything that kid has done is so much more remarkable than some bloke that was born with a silver spoon in his mouth and had all of the networks to go on to be Prime Minister. Everything this kid's done, who watched his parents being killed in Sierra Leone, is so much more remarkable than anything that Boris Johnson's ever done.
It's almost such a shame that you weren't Prime Minister.
Oh, no, I'm very intolerant.
Yeah, we've had those as well, though, haven't we?
I'd look at Gordon Brown and just go, oh, my God, you're up at 5:30 and you're shooting. And that was the other thing. We'd get these emails from him. And this is not the perception of him going, oh, I really appreciate what you did. Geez, you did a really good job. I'm like, until I've had 2 coffees, even my husband won't talk to me. So, I mean, but there's some, do you know what? There are some amazing people out there. And most of the people I think someone said this to me in the Labor Party, and I really hope that they don't feel like I'm dissing them by saying this. Someone said to me, we don't have a lot of very poor people. I think Jeremy Corbyn did bring in some less advantaged MPs. He said it wasn't by design. Some of us bought houses in areas that weren't expensive. And then all of a sudden, like Islington went through the roof, or, you know, all these areas in London went through the roof, and we all ended up having these assets worth loads. We didn't plan to be rich. It wasn't, but we ended up well off. And I think that is interesting, because I struggle with people more than anything, those people who've been poor or disadvantaged, and say, well, I made it, so therefore everyone should. They're the people I don't understand, because I met this guy who was a financial advisor, and I said, you've done really well. You know, he was doing really well. And we were talking about this, and he said, my parents worked. I mean, they just worked every hour that God gave. My mum had 2 jobs. And I said, I feel so sad about that. Their entire life was about giving you opportunities. They had no life of their own. But I did it, he said. And I said, no, you didn't. Your parents did it, and they had no life because of it. And it's not fair to me that your parents had to give up their life so you had an equal opportunity to the kid down the road who just happened to be born by the right person. And I'm sorry, but a lot of the clever out there isn't rich. It's one of the things the Russians got right. If you were clever, you went to university. It was that simple. Now, there was lots of problems in that system. If you were clever, you went to university. And also, we had a very flat wage structure. And the people that got paid more were the nurses and doctors and teachers. And I'm sorry, that works for me. That really does. Because, you know,
coronavirus tells us that they're the important people.
Oh, God, exactly. I know we were talking about that before, but it's the rubbish men that we need. It's the Tesco delivery guy. It's the nurses. And yet our parliament is getting a £3,000 pay rise for what? They're not even there. They're also getting paid expenses when they're not even there. And our nurses but we can't afford a pay rise for them. They risk their lives every day for us. My doctor, my specialist, is working on coronavirus. He got very ill a few years ago and nearly died, but he's out there putting his life on the line for people he doesn't even know, who don't even value him. And now, I'm sorry, in this system, in our capitalist system, it's where the money goes. I don't really believe that Post Office, the head of the Royal Mail, is worth 3 million quid in bonuses when our nurses are being paid 20-something and can't even afford to live within 50 miles of their job.
It just seemed a bit bonkers, doesn't it?
Sorry, you didn't want politics, did you?
That's fine. So, what are you doing now, Nicole? You're not.
Well, no, it's just, I just have one of those lives, don't I? So I'm happily trotting along in Gordon Brown and with Gordon Brown and my team, who I absolutely loved. And something starts to go wrong. And to be fair, it was quite stressful. Like, it was one of those jobs we thought we should bring our sleeping bags in for. But I loved it. And all of a sudden, my body's starting to break down a bit. And my boss infuriated me by signing me off sick. Oh, my God. And my doctor refused to sign me back. And all of a sudden, I get back to my job and I'm like, I can't physically do this. I actually can't physically do this. So I discover many years later that I've got EDS, which is a genetic condition. And unfortunately, the one thing, I had a med that you shouldn't have, and I was on it for 5 years. So I was falling all over the place and my joints just dislocate. So I couldn't commute. So basically, I am a bit stuck. And ironically, and you will love this, I am looking for work from home because everything I do, I can do working from home, right? Oh no, you can maybe work from home 1 day a week. Now that is so ironic, given now everybody is working from home, and realizing that actually when you don't have to add commuting to your work and when you don't have to add getting ready, you get a whole lot more value out of your staff. Of course, we all knew that. And also, if you don't have to worry about getting home to pick up your kid, your mind is fully on your job. So anyway, the irony is I couldn't do it. So I had to sit back and think, what else can I do? So I did a little bit of policy and comms consultation. which I really enjoyed. I did the most amazing contract with the FCA. I got involved with LinkedIn Local with Alex. If she asks you to write a few things, be very suspicious. So, I loved LinkedIn Local. I'm an old politics person. So watching a movement rise that wasn't in any way contrived, it was completely came out of a desire of people to get together and without any agenda. So I did some amazing things, but basically I sat back and thought, what do I love? And all of my friends from school said, we always thought you'd be a writer. And I love writing. I've always written. So I am now ghostwriting. I'm an author. So, the LinkedIn Local book has just come out. I mostly write fiction. I love fiction. I've just finished my crime novel and had some amazing feedback from some agents. So it's absolutely gory. I'm not sure I'll ever let you read it. Otherwise, you'll be very concerned about what goes on in this head of mine. But it's funny. I had a conversation. I really wanted to try crime, and I had a conversation with my husband, who will never forgive me for saying this. But the vilest serial killers in Western Australia, where I'm from, were Catherine and David Burney. Chris and his mother were friends with Catherine Burney and her oldest son, who I won't name because they are absolutely not. And God, I hope those kids are okay. Their last name is not Burney, by the way. But he just mentioned it to me. And I've always had this issue about, one, at what point do you go from being a victim to a perpetrator? So David Burney, the abuse in his life was one of the worst Western Australia had ever seen, and yet we somehow seemed incapable of protecting him from it. It was almost inevitable he would go on to be some sort of sexual predator. There was also something about when they met each other, there is a question that she was also abused. When they met each other, the chemistry, the Rose and Fred West, the Myra Hindley and Ian
Brady.
Thank you, Brady. Ian Huntley, also weird, but anyway. But when the chemistry of when two people come together with some sort of matching dysfunction. The other thing that really bugged me is that everyone assumed she was the victim, that she was a victim of his. Oh, she was not a victim of his. He, I think, was perfectly happy to trot around raping people. I didn't get any sense he had any compunction about that at all. I think she was a big part of them being murdered. She had some bizarre notion that they then slept with her husband, not because they wanted to, and there was no sleeping. She then went on to be the queen bee of the women's prison, and he didn't. He ended up dead, and he was, I gather, mistreated while he was there. That's not unusual in prisons, and I'm certainly not advocating that at all. I would have liked him to live a very long life and know just how much everybody hated him. Or perhaps even at some stage have been rehabilitated, albeit. And interestingly enough, it's only come up recently because she wants parole and the Attorney General has said it's not happening ever. So interestingly enough, when he said that, all of a sudden I went, oh my God, there's my story. And all of a sudden, this fabulous woman detective came to me and I thought, I love the idea of women at their worst. We cringe at women being that bad, but when women lose their natural empathy, I think they can be worse than men. But we always defer to, she must have been his victim as well. So I totally call it out in this book. And also this amazing woman with massive imposter syndrome in a men's world who ends up being the hero of the story. So they're the hero and the villain to the equal extent. And it just came to me. And then I decided after that, I'm going to do some more for her because I love that character. But I think I'm going to deal with a bit of cozy crime for a while. I think brutal rape, murder, burying people alive is... I couldn't do it in the first person. Honestly, it would have been really powerful. But when you're in that killer's head, you're just like, yeah, that's way not where I want to go.
Sometimes you look at like Stephen King and just thinking, how does he sleep?
Ironically, I love Stephen King. His advice on writing is amazing, but I can't read his books. I know I was on holidays last year reading The Outsiders. oh, you remember when we had holidays? And I'm reading this book and I'm like, oh my God, this is freaking me out. And yet The Green Mile and Shawshank Redemption have to be two of the classics. But his advice on, and I would say that, his book on writing, the bit in the middle. Now, this is ironic too, because he struggles with nonfiction. He pumps out fiction all the time. But he said that book took him about 18 months and he really didn't enjoy it. But his advice on writing is the best I've ever read. So I now ghostwrite people's books, mostly business people. And I write my own books, and I also coach people to write their books. And can I just say, one of my clients yesterday who has written the most amazing book, and this is sisterhood coming together, because out of the blue, she posted, I run this domestic violence service. I want to write a book, and my head hadn't even clicked in, and my fingers went, I'm going to coach you for free. And I think I felt like I'm in a place now where I can do something about domestic violence. So she wrote this amazing story. Another woman comes along and edits it, publishes it, and is promoting it for free. And yesterday she won a Woman of the Year award. Oh, the author. I know. How cool is that? Her name is Julie Budge. And she got the Women in Community Women of the Year awards. And her book is entirely to raise funds for a residential space for women suffering from domestic violence, because as we know, they do fall between the cracks. And I have to say, that is one thing about coronavirus. Domestic violence, the profile of domestic violence has just gone through the roof. And I honestly thought it would get lost. Her patron is also the amazing Julie Walters, who writes the foreword. So I'm going to be promoting this book. And what focused us, unfortunately, a lot on the book is one of her long-term clients died while she was writing the book. And it just, I worked in a community legal centre that did domestic violence, and every Monday we would come in to see who had died. You know, and I mean, I know it's 20 years ago, but, you know, we'd sit in the court with someone and they'd have worn a boob tube or something inappropriate in the court, and the magistrate wouldn't give them a restraining order because they'd turned up in inappropriate clothes, and a few weeks later they'd be dead. And you'd just be, oh, for God's sake. But the problem is, the perception is it's a poverty issue. Well, I can tell you that lawyers, police and politicians have a terrible reputation. Certainly in our area, and they're scarier because they're so articulate and so believable and so functional that you don't actually see it. That's not to say all lawyers or politicians or police have an issue like that, but they were highly represented, some of those industries, and I'm sure a lot of others as well. Yeah, so that was really exciting. That was just one of those moments where, and it really was synchronicity that all the people that she needed came together at the same time. And I've no doubt I just have a feeling about this book, perhaps as the Julie Walters thing as well, although I think our Julie Budge is going to become as famous as Julie Walters. But she'll get her residential property. And it really is about, you know, there's a lot of male allies in this process as well. And I think, you know, we know that from Me Too, we know that from Black Lives Matter, that we all kind of have to come together. And often it's the people that aren't necessarily directly affected that make the argument much more powerfully.
Oh, it's wonderful. Is there anything we've forgotten to mention? Is there anything that we need to mention?
I think the only other thing I'd say is that when I found out about the next disability, I was just not the happiest chappy. What I would say is that I have found a way around it. And obviously this year business is difficult for all of us. So it's not the year to be judging on how well we're doing. And I'm not a business person. I've never been a business person. I'm like the anti-marketing person. But I do think also we are facing, this world is changing how we think about things. So if people are working from home, whether I can commute or not becomes irrelevant. So while at the time it felt devastating, and I have to say the pain levels are horrible, and you know, we all know people out there, even people with long COVID now, who are suffering some of these same things. You know, we often don't see those, and we also dismiss people with disabilities. And actually, I think I'm perfectly capable of contributing in the way I always have from my house. You know, and I think maybe, though, I want this to be an optimistic thing. I want to say I do think the world's changing. We are seeing things differently. And also I was saying to Samson, who does LinkedIn Local in Benin, you know, now that we can take our talent from anywhere, places like India and Africa, they're going to get a much bigger share of economic wealth and distribution, because it doesn't matter where they're from. Because we are now all going to need to, I mean, we're not going to be flying as much. We're not going to be traveling as much. And also, I mean, you know, one of my ghostwriting clients is from India, and I've learned their entrepreneurial spirit is breathtaking. You know, the stuff they come up with, the innovation and what we've got to learn. And, you know, you look at someone like Samson with what small resources he's had, he's changed a whole section of East Africa, French-speaking Africa. And I think so I do think there's some really positive things coming out of this.
Cool.
Yeah, agree.
So we're moving on to the quick fire round now.
Okay.
So we've thought of some interesting questions just to, you know, make us giggle, probably, after all that heavy stuff. So, James, do you want to ask the first question?
Question number 1. What weird or useless talent do you have?
Do you know, one of the advantages to EDS is your hands can clap themselves. So you have to see that. And I can also do this. Is that the sort of weird talent you were looking at?
Yeah, we're going to have to actually take that bit out of the video and actually show them that.
No, it's no good for a video. Oh God, what are the useless talents?
No, that's perfect. We can share that bit. That's hilarious. Okie dokie. So question number 2 is, if you could eliminate one vegetable, which one would you choose?
That is so easy. Swede. What a vile thing that is.
Short and sweet answer. I have lots of memories as a child of Swedes, and
we had to carve them.
Yeah.
We had to carve Swedes instead of pumpkins. Crying out loud, that was painful.
Really? But you didn't eat them. They're horrible. They're really.
I quite like a bit
mashed.
Yeah,
mashed Swede, haggis, neeps and tatties.
Mum said that she did give us the ones we had were probably, and my mum too, God love her. She's a much better cook now, but she used to cut up chunks of vegetables, wash them, stick them in a freezer bag, put a few holes in them, microwave them, and that's how we had to eat them. And that put me off vegetables for a long time, until I worked out that you could have them different to that. I mean, God love her, we were really broke and she made sure we had a lot of veggies, and I'm quite sure that I would not have survived 2 massive disabilities if she hadn't fed us that bloody horrible vegetables. You know, because I know that is what often it's what you don't get when you're broke is veggies, but I don't know what it was about the Swede, but my brothers and I, we will not touch it.
It's really quite nice if you roast it. Nice roasted.
Yeah, didn't roast it. No.
Oh,
beetroot.
Just like
Beetroot.
Sweet away from me.
Yeah, no.
So next question. What movie would be greatly improved if it was turned into a musical?
Ooh. Oh, God, that's really hard. What about E.T.? That would have been fabulous as a musical.
We love a musical, don't we?
Oh, I love a musical too. Yeah, my fave. That, or have you ever seen that New Zealand one, Hunt for the Wilder People? Oh, God, that's hilarious. You have got to watch that movie.
We've got lots of reading and now for talking to you. Thank you.
I thought we should throw in another bonus one of, so you have the opportunity to brief Donald Trump on where we're at in the world. At time of recording, he's still hanging on, not conceding the election. What advice would you give to him?
Oh, something I can say in public.
Yeah. Please call her, do not swear.
Oh, gosh, on the state of the world. I honestly would have to say to him, you have to leave, because everything is going to be better when you're gone. I just don't think, I mean, there's lots I would probably say to him that I won't say on your podcast, but I would think I would have to just look at him straight in the eye and say, everyone is better if you are not here. Sorry, that was very funny, was it? I had some other ones I could have said.
We might have to talk to you about those ones once we finish recording.
Exactly.
Cool. Yes.
I could suggest he tries his disinfectant treatment.
The bleach, dude. Drink the bleach.
The bleach, exactly.
Okie dokie. So the question we always ask all of our guests if you could go back to your 18-year-old self, what advice would you give?
So, okay, I'd rather top myself than go back to when I was 18. I do not see the attraction at all. But there are two very quick things. One, I would say, have more fun. Those exams that you think are going to decide the rest of your life are not. Mm-hmm. It is easier if you do well at them. And you will never get another time to study that is easier than when you're living at home. Mm-hmm. For most of us, it's much harder as an adult. Second thing I'd say is I got really bad advice after what we call our year 12 exams to get into university, and went back and did another year. And I just thought that's it, and having always been reasonably academically clever, I was devastated. It was bad advice. I shouldn't have done it. I should have gone into another course and then transferred, done well and transferred. I ended up getting offered a scholarship for my PhD. I didn't finish my PhD because I wanted to write books. I'm pretty sure that's really bad. But I got offered a scholarship for my PhD. So what happened when I was 18 just was not anywhere near as relevant. It didn't stop my opportunities. Most people aren't offered a PhD with a fee free scholarship. So take it less seriously. It isn't going to decide the rest of your life.
Powerful advice.
Very much so. So for our listeners, if you would like to get in touch or follow Nicole, best place to find her is www.writingtribe.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you ever so much. It's been absolutely fascinating getting to know you a little bit better, Nicole. So thank you.
Thank you, guys. I've loved today. I could have spoken to you for days.
I know, us too.
I think we should have a bottle of wine over a Zoom one night, and then when all of this craziness is over, we shall catch up.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd love to.
It's been really good to speak to you guys.
You too.
Thanks everyone for listening. Check out all the show notes at inspirationnorth.com. Join us again for the next episode when we'll be chatting to another inspirational person. If you like this, subscribe and tell your friends. If you didn't like this, subscribe anyway and tell everybody.